All right, so a quick overview of the important Montessori terms. We just discussed the planes of development. So recap here, we're in infancy or early childhood, the 0 to 3, and it's broken down into two subcategories, the 0 to 3 and the 3 to 6. The absorbent mind, we talked about this already, but it's better defined here for you. It refers to the mind's capacity to take in information and sensations from the world that surrounds it. So we're absorbing everything around us all the time. Infants especially are really absorbing just everything. That's broken down into two different components. We have the unconscious creation, which is the 0 to 3 age range. They're soaking in everything unconsciously. It happens naturally without thought or choice. And then we have the conscious absorption for the 3 to 6 age range. At this point, they're intentionally directing their focus and attention on experiences that will help develop and create different things within them that they're interested in. So through this, the child gains the freedom to move purposely and concentrate and to choose his own direction. Before the age of 3, they're not able to really have a specific purpose other than to fulfill immediate needs. Sensitive periods, again, we talked about this already, but it's a period of time in development in which a child is more responsive to certain stimuli and quicker to learn a particular skill. So during these periods, a child will focus much of his energy and attention on performing a specific task or learning a specific skill. You're going to see lots and lots of repetition or lots of work with similar types of materials. A big one for the 0 to 3 age range, it's broken down into different categories here. Sensorial awareness, so everything that we can do with our senses. That's where the oral fixation comes in. Hopefully we're past that by age 2, but sometimes kids will get stuck in that. That's where biting behaviors can come into play as well. Language development is occurring the entire time. You're going to see huge gains in language and vocabulary and the ability to express themselves all the way through age 6. Order, that's a specific 0 to 3, particularly 1 and 2-year-olds focus tremendously on order. How does your day go when you guys do things differently than normal?
Not well.
Not well.
The kids go spastic, we go spastic.
They need their routine. This is truer for 1 and 2-year-olds than for any other age.
Mondays are horrible.
Usually.
They've been with mom and dad, and everything has been
whatever they want to do.
Yes. And
yes. So
today was chaos. It's just, but that's every Monday. So
yes, and this actually plays into the next number 4 here, attention to detail, age 2. This is a huge one for age 2, and they pay attention to everything, so they notice when something is different than usual. And so that's why in the 2's room it is even more important that everything be consistent. That's why they usually are out of sorts when a different teacher is in the classroom. Even though there are 3 teachers in your room, if one of them is different than usual, then usually the kids are just not.
You saw that when I was gone, that when I wasn't there in the morning last week.
So not that they're not capable of behaving if something's different than usual, it just they do much better with order and routine. Same with motor skills. They're developing huge strides in their motor skills. I mean, this is when they start learning how to throw and kick and jump and run. They really explode and need that physical activity more so than any other age as well. In social relationships, this happens typically from 2 years and on. Before age 2, we do a lot of parallel play, but we're not really being cooperative with somebody else. At age 2, we start to see them wanting to interact specifically with certain individuals. They might be more picky about who they get to sit next to, or they'll start saying that so-and-so is my friend. And then obviously as they get older, they start to really build strong relationships with others. Control of error, we already talked about, so we'll be pointing this out when we start introducing the activities to you guys. Constructive roaming. All right, so this relates back to your question. So constructive roaming is deliberate movement a child makes from place to place while considering options in the process of choosing an activity. So this is the freedom of movement that we're talking about in a Montessori classroom. It is actually a very good sign to see a child go around the classroom for a period of time and not choose any work. They can go around and observe other students working. They might just be looking at the materials in the shelves. They might touch some of the materials. They might actually work with a particular piece of work on the shelf because they haven't decided they want to work with it. They might just like look inside and see what's in the basket, play with some of the materials a little bit before they decide that they want to commit to that material. So having a having a level of freedom and independence does not mean that the child can choose to disturb other children or interrupt the teacher at will. So this is where you have to learn the difference between constructive roaming and destructive roaming. And it sounds like you're having some of the destructive roaming in your classroom. So it is very okay to redirect a child who is disrupting somebody else or who is misusing materials. My basic premise for when you would intervene with a child is if they are hurting themselves, hurting someone else, or hurting a material. If those three things are not going on, then it's probably constructive roaming. And that is perfectly fine. It's very normal for younger students to do it more than older students. You might still see it a little bit with older students, but especially 2.5 to even 4 years old is when we would see that most frequently. But if you're seeing them disturb somebody or being destructive, that's when you would intervene.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, perfect. Points of interest. So this is something I think Brandy brought up at the very beginning. I said we'd come back to it. So as a child is learning a new skill, the Montessori teacher will repeat the lesson to emphasize a movement or a sensorial experience that will help in acquiring the skill. So if a child has trouble learning a particular skill, you need to step back and figure out what is the child really interested in right now. And if it's textures, if they love to touch everything, then the way that you introduce the activity might change a little bit from the way you would typically introduce it, and you might add more motion to the activity. You might rub your hand along it a little bit longer, or you might outline the whatever the material is. So say we'll bring out our knob cylinders. So typically when you're done with it, you'll rub your hand along the top of it. Some students are very visual, so they can just tell where the items are supposed to go. But if they're more physical with materials, then you're going to want to trace every single material. You're going to want to feel how deep it goes. You're going to put your fingers inside. So you're going to spend a lot of time really exploring the material when you give the lesson again. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you have determined that they're more of a verbal learner, then it is okay to add directions while you're presenting the material. I would always save that as a last resort, though.
Now, when we're introducing it to the entire class, do we do just everything? Do the touching? Do the
no? So that's a point of interest. That's something that you add to an activity after you've determined the child needs it.
Okay.
So when I introduce the materials to you, I'm going to give you the basic lesson.
Okay.
Oh, we're going to have to write this up. I'm going to give you the basic lesson, and then you determine what points of interest you need to add to it for a particular child.
Okay.
All right, so moving on to isolation of difficulty. This is what it sounds like, hopefully. It's where you isolate different things that could be difficult for a child. So there are actually two different ways that this works. I'll read through this first section and we'll kind of go into more detail about that. So before giving a presentation, the Montessori teacher analyzes the activity she wants to show the child. Procedures or movements that might prove troublesome are isolated and taught to the child separately. For example, holding and snipping of scissors. Simple movement is shown before cutting zigzag or curved lines. Folding cloths is shown before table washing, as that activity might require you to take the tablecloth off and fold the tablecloth up. And a task should never be so hard that it is overwhelming, nor so easy that it is boring. And you guys will often find this with materials in your classrooms. They tend to get misused because either it's too difficult or it's too boring, and so you have to figure out where the happy medium is. So you really want to, when planning an activity, and Brandy, we were talking about this earlier with the dishwashing station, we're not ready to introduce that because there are lots of different steps that lead up to being able to use something like a dishwashing station. So you really want to figure out what might be a hiccup for a child in this material, and then let's introduce an activity that's going to focus on that particular skill. The other component of isolating the difficulty for a child is that it's actually embedded within the materials and activities themselves. So as the materials, they help a child create order in his environment. The difficulty that a child must discover and understand might be isolated in a single piece of material. The isolation simplifies the child's task for him and enables him to perceive the problem more readily. You're going to see this often more when we get into the sensorial environment, where we don't combine a bunch of different concepts into one activity. So we have, if you guys are familiar, the brown stairs, the pink tower, the red rods, those all isolate a specific concept. And not until after they've been introduced to those do we start combining those concepts together in a particular activity. So it's two basically the same ideas here, but we break it down into different ways. So in a practical life activity, you have to figure out what those difficulties are and how to isolate them, versus in other areas it isolates it for you, if that makes sense. Okay. Normalization. Who is familiar with this term? Natalia?
When a child doesn't want to be redirected and they're comfortable in the classroom without approaching a teacher.
Very good. So they know the expectations of the environment, they know how to maneuver, they know how to get their own work, be able to choose it for themselves, get it out, work with it properly, put it away on their own. They can maneuver in the environment without the aid of a teacher. So that's what we're striving for with all of our students. So that's going to be different for every child. Some kids, mentalities are just more suited to a normalization that we would expect in the classroom, where others, they're a little bit more high energy. It might take them a longer period of time to settle into the normal routine and expectations. But you can't expect a brand new child who started at the age of 3 after 3 months to be normalized. It's not enough time for them to be acclimated to the expectations of the environment, where you might have a 3-year-old come into your classroom who actually seems relatively normalized because they've been with us since infancy. So you're going to see some differences depending on how long a child has been in the program and just their normal behavior. And I do want to point out the term that Montessori coined here, normalization, does not mean normal, quote unquote. It doesn't mean you're either normal or abnormal. It's basically the way that we would typically see a child interact in the environment when they've had proper upbringing of a Montessori environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's not them being normal, this is their normal routine.
Exactly. They function normally within the environment. Exactly. All right, and then we have the work versus play discussion. All right, raise your hand if maybe you don't anymore, but how many of you guys really prefer to call what the kids do in the classroom play? Nobody?
I don't know if it's prefer, but it's like, that's what we started saying.
That's what you said. Okay, how many came to Agape thinking that the kids played all day?
Well, it is that they play, but I just called it play.
You called it play. Okay,
Yeah.
well, they are playing.
I came from a regular daycare, not a Montessori, and that's all they did. They played plastic Tonka trucks, and they didn't learn really anything.
So it's not that the kids here are not playing. We don't call it play, though, because it's vastly different from what a typical mindset of play is. Mm-hmm. So work for us is defined as purposeful activity. It's something that has a direct aim behind it. Why are they doing what they're doing? Are they doing it just to have fun, or are they doing it because it's helping them develop a particular skill? So that's where you define the difference between work and play. So Montessori observed that children learn by engaging in purposeful activities of their own choosing. When children can choose what they want to do, they do not differentiate between work and play. So Montessori believed, as we all believe, that play is the important work of early childhood. They are doing what they are doing because they enjoy it. They can use their imagination with it, but they're gaining those real life skills underneath it as well. So they're accomplishing tasks. All right, who is familiar with a work cycle? Enough that you understand, enough to describe it to somebody else.
No, not enough to.
You're like, I kind of got it a little bit. No, Natalia's turning away from me, so that means she's not an answer. So you might hear Montessorians talk about this as a work period or work time. So period, time, cycle, they're all interchangeable phrases. It is the uninterrupted period of time made available in a Montessori program for children to work with specific learning materials of their choice in the way for which the materials were designed. So this is where we're hopefully starting to see some normalization. We give them, depending on the age group, it's a different amount of time, but we give them a set period of time every day where the kids get to explore the materials in the classroom. You might see teachers giving lessons to the kids. You might see them working individually. You might see them doing group activities. The point is that whatever it is they're doing, it was their choice that they're doing it. So it's not because we've set this particular time aside to do art activity together as a group. You came to art table because you wanted to do art and it was offered at that time. So there's a difference between it being a set determined amount of time to do something and them getting to choose what it is that they want to do. Through the years of observation around the world, Montessori came to the understanding that children, when left in freedom, displayed a distinctive work cycle which was so predictable it could even be graphed. This cycle, with 2 peaks and 1 valley, lasted approximately 3 hours. Now this is referring to a typical children's house classroom, which is the 3 to 6 age range. You're not going to see a 3-hour work cycle with 1 or 2-year-olds. You will see a work cycle, but it's typically going to be somewhere between an hour and 2 hours. Occasionally I've seen a 2's classroom get up to 2.5 hours, but it just kind of depends on the level of normalization in the classroom. So if every single student in the classroom has been with us since infancy and they all have a pretty calm demeanor, you might actually be able to strive closer to that 3-hour mark, but it's not necessarily likely.
Do they take breaks in between and then pick it up again?
So the work cycle for you guys, think about your entire morning session.
Yeah.
The morning session is 8:30 to 11:30. That's our 3-hour work cycle. So everything in here, if you look at the graph up here, year 1, that is your reintroduction to the class.
Okay.
So oftentimes we will have our circle time at that 1 mark. And you want that to be no more than 30 minutes because that's a reacclimation to our environment for the day. We're resetting the tone. We might introduce some basic lessons to the kids at circle. And then 2 is when they get into their work cycle. So as soon as you're done with your reintroduction to class, then we go into open work time and the kids will start working on materials that they've usually had a lesson on before. So this is a period where they're either receiving lessons on new things or they're working on materials that they have previously been introduced to, and it's usually simpler work during that time. And then for a children's house environment, at the hour mark is when we see this dip. And the 3 is where you really start. I'm going to actually switch to the next slide and we'll continue talking about this because it makes it a little bit bigger for us. So it's on the chart, if you can read it, it's the 10 o'clock false fatigue. And that simply means that it's kind of our need for a coffee break in the morning. When you guys get into work and you're really in a good groove and then all of a sudden you're like, I need to go walk around. I need to go do something. I need to refresh my mind and, you know, kind of get some energy out a little bit. So it might seem like your classroom is starting to get in disarray, but really they are just having this false fatigue where they need to move around a little bit before they can really sit and focus on some more demanding work.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this happens different with toddlers and 2s. And infants, you guys are all on your own schedule, so I'm sorry if this is like, like I don't know how this applies. I promise it does, but not directly for this one. You're going to see this probably closer to 45 minutes.
Yeah. Well,
You guys will probably see this closer to a 30-minute, between the 30 and 45 minutes.
So we have snack after circle, so are we like not supposed to do that, or?
No, you can, and in the toddler and 2's classrooms, you can't really do self-serve like they do it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of an extension of your circle time.
Yeah.
Your circle should be shorter, so we shouldn't be having full 30-minute circles. So between your circle and your snack, that should be about 30 to 45 minutes right there.
Okay.
That's what I'm doing.
And then after that, you're going into your work time. So the chart, the point is you're going to see these peaks and curves, but the time frame might be a little different. So once you get into the actual work time, it's going to be really like 30 minutes to an hour, depending on your age range, that you're going to start seeing that false fatigue.
So is it because it's self-serve in our classroom, it's considered Montessori work
Yes.
time as well?
Yes.
That's cool.
So the snack in a children's house room is a work choice. It's not required that they eat snack. You guys don't, sit and force all of them to do it at the same time. It's their option of when they get to do that and partake in it.
Okay.
And they have to set it up and take it down and clean up and all that stuff. So it's just another activity they get to do. But if you guys can push through that false fatigue, which usually lasts between 10 and 15 minutes, it's really redirecting the kids at that point, trying to get them back on task. Some of it's allowing them to get some wiggles out, so don't instantly redirect when you start to see that, as long as they're not being disruptive. This is where you'll see a lot of constructive roaming, and then you'll start to see some deconstructive roaming, and that's when you want to intervene. But if you can push past the false fatigue, you'll have about 45 minutes in the toddler room, maybe 30 minutes to 45 minutes, up to an hour and a half in the children's house room of solid, hard, dedicated work time. And a lot of teachers will think that false fatigue is the time to go out and have recess, but if you do that, then you're resetting. And you're going to have to start this whole cycle over again, which doesn't really give you enough time to even get to that peak of hard work, because you're going to be restarting and then you don't have another 2 hours left in the morning to get that done. And then you can see at the peak, it starts to slowly calm down. She called it calm serenity. So that's where you will almost see the kids start cleaning up for themselves. They know, it's about time to get ready either for recess or for lunchtime, whatever the normal routine is. And you might have kids who work right up to that very last point, but then you'll slowly actually have kids start putting their work away and kind of coming back over to the tables or wherever it is that you guys would meet to get ready for lunch or whatever you have coming up next. So I want you guys to really try to pay attention to what that normal flow is in your classroom and how you can push past some of those false fatigue moments to get that really strong work period.